As I've said before, space is scary. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we are counting down our list of the top 10 scary things told by NASA employees. Number 10. Extended space travel can change your DNA. Astronaut Scott Kelly, who spent a year at the International Space Station in 2016, returned to find out that he was 2 inches taller than his departing height. The new physical differences between Kelly and his identical brother, Mike, also an astronaut, were startling. Scientists compared the DNA of the two and found that besides growing 2 inches, Kelly's gut bacteria was completely different and his gene expression had changed. Scientists concluded that the changes were caused by the stresses of space travel, which can cause changes in a cell's biological pathways. Now, although Kelly eventually returned to his original height, his other genetic changes were seemingly irreversible, meaning Kelly and his brother are no longer identical twins, which is insane. Number 9. Time on Earth moves faster than time in space. Yes, this isn't just something that was made up for the film Interstellar, it's a real thing. Time moves differently in space. Due to time dilation, a perceptive theory of relativity referencing a difference in the elapsed time measured by 2 observers, astronauts stationed in outer space lose approximately 1 second per week. The spin of Earth, its orbit around the Sun, and the solar system's motion around the Milky Way all combine to decrease the time we experience on Earth. Though minuscule, the second per week dilation results in nearly a minute lost annually and more than 8.5 minutes lost each decade. Number 8. An astronaut was covered in toxic ammonia during a spacewalk. Bob Kirby was no stranger to spacewalking when he was installing upgrades to the International Space Station. But while out there, a cooling line broke and spewed toxic ammonia all over his suit. Now, for those of you who don't know, a spacecraft is a closed system, meaning that the only air that you have to work with is the air you brought up with you. Now, first Bob had to stop the leak, then he had to figure out how he was going to get back in the space shuttle without bringing the volatile ammonia contaminating his spacesuit. But some good old-fashioned science helped with that one. Ammonia has a low boiling point, so he just needed to vaporize it off his suit. To do this, he simply baked himself in sunlight for an extra 30 minutes, arguably one of the most surreal and terrifying sunbathing methods a human can experience. Later, a fellow astronaut brushed off the suit and equipment. To be extra cautious, they partially vented the shuttle airlock, and next, to be even more careful, the shuttle crew all wore oxygen masks inside until they were positive nothing had made its way in. Nothing did make its way in, thankfully, but that sounds like a terrifying experience. Number 7. Magnetic explosions. Every day, the space around Earth booms with giant explosions. Yup, explosions. When the solar wind, the stream of charged particles from the sun, pushes against the magnetic environment that surrounds and protects Earth, it tangles the sun and Earth's magnetic fields. Eventually, the magnetic field lines snap and realign, shooting away nearby charged particles. This explosive event is known as a magnetic reconnection. While we can't see magnetic reconnection with our bare eyes, we can see its effects. Occasionally, some of the perturbed particles pour into Earth's upper atmosphere where they spark the auroras. Magnetic reconnection happens all across the universe wherever there are twisting magnetic fields. NASA missions like the magnetospheric multiscale mission measure reconnection events around Earth, which helps scientists understand reconnection where it's harder to study, like in flares on the sun, in areas surrounding black holes, and around other stars. I just don't like the idea of things constantly exploding around us, and we can't do anything about it. Number 6. A jammed solar panel threatened the safety of the entire ISS. Astronaut Scott Parzynski had to install a new module on the ISS that would serve as a node for the addition of future research laboratories. Part of the mission required changing the location of an array of solar panels. Things are going along really well until the crew inside commanded these larger solar panels to extend, he said. They got jammed up and the panels began to tear. It was unsafe to continue to extend this panel any further, you couldn't retract it either, Scott said. There was concern that if we even tried to undock the space shuttle, it might rip apart and hit the shuttle. After 72 hours of grueling work on the ground, NASA came up with a plan. Scott would have to travel further away from the safety of an airlock than had ever been previously attempted. It wasn't only the distance that was nerve-wracking. As Scott explained, there was a real danger that we could do even worse damage to the space station. Then there was a partial potential risk to myself because if there was any metal to metal connection with the solar panel or arcing, it could actually electrocute me or cause ignition of the 100% oxygen in my spacesuit. All the tools I was working with had to be specially insulated. The metal parts of my spacesuit had to be wrapped in special tape, he said. Thankfully, everything worked out and the mission was a success, and Scott has said, "I still to this day think it's one of NASA's greatest accomplishments." Number 5. Astronauts must drink recycled sweat and urine. This isn't as scary as it's just gross. Water is a limited resource in space, and because of this, astronauts must resort to recycling their own waste. It only takes about 8 days for the systems on the space station to process water. NASA astronaut Scott Kelly consumed approximately 730 liters of recycled urine and sweat during his year-long mission. "It tastes like bottled water," says Lane Carter, the water subsystem manager for the ISS at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. I don't really trust him though. He continued, "As long as you can psychologically get past the point that it's recycled urine and condensate that comes out of the air." Now, condensate is the collected breath and sweat of the crew, shower runoff, and urine from animals on board the station. 93% of all water on board is reclaimed, according to a video posted by Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield while he was on the space station in 2013. "We can recycle about 6,000 extra liters of water for the station every year," he said. "I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, but I don't think I could do that." Number 4. There are floating animal corpses in space. Okay, well this sounds strange right away, but this makes sense considering the first test subjects to make it to space were animals. Before space programs started sending people up into orbit, scientists couldn't agree on what it would be like for a living organism to leave Earth's atmosphere. What would be the effects of weightlessness on a mammal? How would the body handle radiation from the sun? So instead of sending people up in such a risky situation, the United States and Russia sent monkeys, chimps, dogs, and other animals into space in order to analyze such effects. And when a seemingly good thing turned into a failure, these animal corpses were launched into space where they reportedly float to this day and can be seen by astronauts making trips to space. While this is sad, this scene can seem a bit creepy too. Just imagine animal corpses floating around against the backdrop of a black and infinite space, and you have to just go on doing what you came to do. I also feel like this would make me feel sad if I was an astronaut and was missing my pet and saw that. Number 3. Space music. Sound needs a medium to travel, and thus it cannot be heard in the vacuum of space. Yet, astronauts have returned to Earth with fascinating tales of hearing odd noises while in space, which is terrifying. During the Apollo 10 mission, which was a test run for sending the first men to the moon, astronauts were carrying various equipment with them which was being tested to withstand space as they were deemed essential for the moon landing. While circling the moon, the astronauts on the vessel heard a certain whistling sort of music. The music lasted for almost an hour and creeped the living daylights out of the astronauts. One of them described the sound as a sort of otherworldly music. On returning to Earth, the astronauts struggled for a while on whether or not to tell NASA and the rest of the world about what they experienced. Later, astronaut Michael Collins, who was also part of the Apollo 11 mission with Aldrin and Armstrong, revealed hearing similar music while on the moon's surface. An engineer from US Space Agency said the noises likely came from interference caused by radios within the lunar and the command modules. However, Al Worden, an astronaut on Apollo 15, disputed the explanation. Number 2. Space snake. Retired NASA astronaut Dr. Story Musgrave has accomplished a lot in his career as a spaceman. Only the second astronaut to fly on 6 space flights, Dr. Musgrave is also the most formally educated astronaut with 6 academic degrees. He is also the only astronaut to fly aboard all 5 space shuttles. With all this, he seems to be a really credible source, and he has claimed that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. Now, it's not hard to imagine that this could have been a hose detached from the spacecraft, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant. He claims that he observed the 6 to 8 foot long eel or serpent-like creature on not 1 but 2 of his space flights. During multiple interviews, Dr. Musgrave has insisted that alien life is out there and that he has observed it, which is just scary. And coming in at number 1, they're on the moon watching us. When astronaut Neil Armstrong took a walk on the moon and became the first man to do so in 1969, many conspiracy theories came to light. For one, people claimed he didn't actually go to the moon and that the footage was recorded in a studio. Of the many conspiracy theories surrounding this moment, there's one that remains a mystery to date. During the Apollo 11 mission, after Neil landed on the moon, NASA claims to have lost transmission for roughly 2 minutes. And in a reportedly secret message to NASA, Neil said, "These babies were huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon, watching us." Now that sounds absolutely terrifying, and whether this is true or not, the fact that NASA lost transmission with Neil for 2 minutes is scary within itself. Being out in space on a different planet and being completely alone is terrifying. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 scary things told by NASA employees. These points make me even more scared of space and make me very uncomfortable. Which one on our list scares you the most? Let us know in the comments down below. I'm your host Emily, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Astronaut was covered in toxic ammonia.